Hey everyone, welcome in to another Stock Talk episode here on the KE Report. I am joined again by Quinton Hennigh, geologist and private investor, as well as geologic advisor to Crescat Capital. Quinton and I took a little break during summer, but we are back and we're going to be covering four different companies, all of which I've had on the show recently, and some of which have been moving share price wise quite nicely on the back of news. We're going to start off with Inflection Resources right now, traded on the CSE under the symbol AUCU and on the OTCQB under the symbol AUCUF. We just chatted with Alistair Waddell, the president and CEO, last week on the back of some drill results at the Duck Creek project. Now, Inflection Resources has Anglo Gold earning in, especially on the Duck Creek project, and can also select four other projects through an earn-in agreement to take them to a 75% owner of those projects, but that's through a lot of spending. The recent news at Duck Creek was the company hitting, as Alistair even called it, some smoke, elevated arsenic. The company is looking for large porphyry systems in the Macquarie Arc in Eastern Australia. Quinton, what's your thoughts on some of these recent drill results and overall at this Duck Creek project for Inflection Resources, please?
Okay, so the way to think about their entire effort in New South Wales is that they are looking for porphyries, but under a blanket. Okay, imagine a big blanket covering the entire region. And it's not a terribly thick blanket. You know, we're talking about a few tens of meters, but it does make this a blind exploration project. Okay, it's not as though they can see outcropping porphyries or mineralization or something like this. They're exploring through, we'll call it, techniques that are designed to explore for blind deposits. And these are both geochemical, but also geophysical techniques. And, with the backing they have, Anglo Gold coming in and earning on these things, like you've talked about, very innovative structure. It's also a great structure for a junior company because exploring for porphyries can be expensive and the market's pretty tough to raise a lot of money. So seeing a commitment like Anglo Gold has put up for this is fantastic, and I think it will lead to success.
So, Quinton, one thing that the company's doing is using this ANT survey. So, to your point about this being undercover, this ANT survey, it's a newer technology. They're hoping that will help them vector into these porphyries. What do you think of this ANT survey?
So to describe it, you're basically looking at sound waves traveling through the ground. Most people might not be aware, but sound waves are kind of some of the waves that are generated, say, during an earthquake. Okay, so these vibrations that travel through the ground are, both man-made, but also natural, like during natural events. And it doesn't have to be something as dramatic as an earthquake. There's literally background sounds coming out, through the ground at any given time. The earth kind of rings like a bell. Okay, think of it that way. And by studying these waves, they can actually ascertain some of the characteristics of the rocks in the shallow environment, especially in this kind of regime that they're looking for these porphyries. They can see the density of the rock, or the nature of the rock, whether sound transmits to it quickly or slowly, and they can contrast that. Okay, so they can say something about the rock, its density, its competency, and because of that, because of the fact we know that things like porphyry systems, big porphyry systems, generate large alteration assemblage, packages around them. Like there's a big halo of hydrothermal alteration around porphyries, and then that porphyry that forms the core also has its own characteristics. You can kind of differentiate, say the background rock, the country rocks, from these porphyry centers, and that's what they're doing. They're able to use sound waves, these are passive sound waves, and using big grids of geophones. They're basically little microphones that pick up these waves across a broad area. They integrate them through a satellite, that collects the data, and they're able to image the subsurface. I think it's absolutely remarkable. I think I reviewed this company a couple of years ago for a large mining client that I've done some work for. And I think it's one of the most innovative things I've seen recently. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it starts taking off and being used in a big way. At Duck Creek, it's really helped them, focus on discrete areas where they see a bit higher velocities or higher, sound waves travel at higher speeds. And that's helped them focus on numerous drill targets. It's really helped them sharpen their focus. So they're not just drilling blindly to find these things, not hunt and peck. It's more targeted, right? Saves money.
Well, and as you said, that's important when you're drilling these sort of systems and trying to drill off porphyries. But let's talk about these recent results then, because it was released last week that the company, again, released drill results. The headline numbers in terms of mineralization weren't all that impressive, to be fair, but they hit this elevated arsenic. And boy, oh boy, this stock has really moved. It was, I think last week, the stock was right around 15 cents Canadian, moved up to a high of 28 cents recently, currently is right around that 25 to 26 cent level. That's big moves off, again, drill results that aren't necessarily headline catching. So what's your thought on the market reaction to all of this?
I'll tell you, I've actually gotten quite a few emails because people know that, the group I work with, Crescat, is fairly heavily invested in Inflection. And you say, well, gee, what's in this news release that spawns this kind of interest? Well, first of all, I'm glad to see it because it tells me that there's sophisticated money coming into the market. To see a stock like this move on what is really technical information is cool. I mean, there's people out there that are buying up this stock and they're serious players because they can see this data and where it's leading. Okay, now what is the data? Well, like I said, they focus their drill targeting using A&T, and they've now drilled some holes in new areas, one of which has generated, some pretty long intervals. I shouldn't say one. There's several holes that have generated long intervals of alteration and stockwork veining. In that veining, there's typically pyrite, so it's not copper, okay, directly. But the thing that's really neat is they're starting to see the geochemical signatures of what are classic porphyry systems in this region. Okay, so in particular, they're seeing elevated arsenic showing up in the stockwork mineralization over long intervals. Okay, and in the Macquarie Arch region where they're exploring, this arsenic signature is absolutely critical to vectoring in on a porphyry discovery. They're seeing levels of arsenic, and we're not talking about huge numbers. We're talking about a few tens of ppm, maybe 100 to 200 ppm or something like that. But man, those levels are exactly what you use to focus or lead you into a discovery. To give an example, back in the 19th, such geochemical exploration was used by Newcrest at their Cadia project, and that led them into the discovery at Ridgeway, okay, which was a major copper gold discovery. I think Inflection with the work that they're doing with Anglo Gold, very smart people involved here, very clear focus. I think one day we're all going to wake up and be like, wow, they did it. They nailed this thing. There's something there. That's what you're seeing. You're seeing people, smart people, and good data come together, and I think you're going to see a great outcome here. That's my view.
Interesting. Okay, well, that's all very encouraging. I guess I should ask you then, look, Duck Creek is just one of many projects that Inflection holds. It is the one project that Anglo Gold is moving forward with quicker than all the other assets because they did move it into that phase 2 where Anglo can earn up to 51% by spending $7 million. Alistair went through some more of those details in our interview, but what about all the other land that this company owns in this Macquarie Arc area?
Look, they have a lot of other targets. They have a huge land package. They have data on some of these other targets. It's not like Anglo Gold has only spent money at Duck Creek. They've actually spent some money doing both, gathering the data they need for targeting, but also doing a little bit of drilling on a couple others. Earlier stage, these other targets, but they're equally as compelling. I think with the A&T, as they gather more of that data and they can differentiate targets better on these other areas, I think you'll see Anglo be persistent. Anglo Gold did not come to this region and strike this deal to just kind of have a quick look-see or, no, they're committed. They have a long-term commitment, and I think, Duck Creek, it might be the first discovery, hopefully, that's made, but you'll see more. There's a very good shot of finding multiple discoveries across the property.
Hey, it's always nice to have a big partner to drill these projects. It's a fun story to follow along with. News can be slow sometimes, but we're going to have more drill results coming out of Duck Creek. Let's move on to a silver stock that we've had on the show recently, Kootenay Silver, traded on the TSX Venture Exchange under the symbol KTN and on the OTC markets under the symbol KOOYF. Now, look, this company's been focused in Mexico for a while. They built up a fairly large resource base at two of their projects that aren't really the focus right now. Right now, the company's been drilling out this Columba project, focused a lot around this D vein. We've also talked about the B vein. What do you think about the, I guess, change that Kootenay Silver has seen in this Columba project?
Okay, before I start talking about Columba, I guess where I'd start is talking about the company, its team, its restructuring. Look, they've got really strong team in place at this point. You're seeing a lot of names on their registry now in terms of management and directors that are high power and especially in the exploration side of the business. These are people that know how to take projects forward. Okay, so I really like to see that. They've recapitalized the company through a wind back. I think they did that in late 2023, if I remember right. So, I'm not saying it's painful to see any company have to go through that, but sometimes it's necessary. And quite frankly, this was a case where it was necessary. Okay, so they've got a relatively tight share structure at this point. So that's good. They got a new team, new share structure. They have some pretty good, strong shareholders as well. Eric Sprott's in there, for example. And so we know this company has kind of that horsepower to tackle these things. Now, you're right. They do have resources in, where they focus in the, Promontorio, La Negra, and Cigarra and stuff like this. These are the areas that they focused before, and they do have, they're interesting projects. They're good projects. They have a bit lower grade. I mean, some of them are even bulk tonnage targets. But this work they're doing at Columba is very interesting. Okay, I think the company has pivoted and focused now on what is probably the better price in their portfolio. And I'm actually glad to see this. I think Columba, has that I don't know how to say, maybe a smell of a large scale Mexican silver vein district, a la, the big ones, like, Fred and Guanajuato and things like this. Like, wow, this Columba project actually has pretty good grade, but it's also got a very, very, rich series of vein systems that, to explore. And the company is tackling some of these just absolutely remarkable veins that, for whatever reason, haven't been explored all that well over time. So I think, it's higher grade too. I think this is the big price. So the company's doing a good job.
What do you think about that whole concept of this grade line that they have? When we've talked to Jim, who runs the company, look, and even on their cross sections, you can see that under a certain depth, that's when they start hitting all this grade, and they haven't even gone really deep with some of their drilling. Is this geologically understood in your eyes? And what in your eyes could be possible if they do continue to drill deeper?
Well, look, it's very typical of epithermal vein systems. Okay, so, and look, I mean, part of it's related to where, critical levels were, like the boiling horizon and things like this, at least in our current understanding. But I also think there's lithologic controls and other controls that, kind of set the stage for where the best grades drop out. What we're finding, in fact, is that the zones of flashing, which is basically, I don't know if you saw that eruption in Yellowstone a few weeks ago, but those kind of events that happen in hydrothermal systems where you get a sudden boiling event where fluids just, flash. They basically turn to steam very quickly. Those can actually deposit extremely high grades, and they usually do so at a critical level down in the ground. And I think, if I had to sum it up, I think that these guys have found the sweet spot in the system at Columba. Like that elevation, they've clued into it, and they are on the tippy top of something that could be a lot bigger. Okay, and high grade too. I think there's some really good grades here.
Do you have any thoughts on some of the other veins? As I said, a lot of the focus has been on the D vein, but There is this B vein. There's also the F vein. The company will be putting some holes from this year's program into those. Any thoughts on these other veins?
Yeah, look, all of the veins are interlinked. I mean, that's the important thing to understand. So the fluids that form these things were probably all, were all of the veins or the fractures in the ground that host the veins were accessed by these ore forming fluids. Okay, so in my view, it wouldn't be surprising to see all of these generate a significant resource and probably similar grades, similar high grade. It's pretty typical of the vein systems in Mexico. Some might be skinnier than others. That's usually where things might change a bit depending on orientation of the veins and how the stresses and strains that were active at the time of the veins formed. That might determine how thick the veins are. But I wouldn't be surprised to see a similar high grade occur in all of these structures. Yeah, and there's even places where things come together in a big way, like where you see almost more like stockwork, mineralization, like lots of little close space fractures that might make bulk tonnage targets as well. So I think it's a very rich target environment. It reminds me a lot of Vizsla in the early days. Yeah.
Hey, that's saying a lot. We continue to follow along with Kootenay Silver, so check out that interview that we posted last week. Let's also talk Borealis Mining, traded BOGO on the TSX Venture Exchange. This is a newly listed company. They acquired the Borealis mine in Nevada. Look, there's historic resources here. It's a permitted heap leach gold mine and processing facility. Company says there hasn't been any exploration since 2012, no regional exploration since 2008. What do you know about this Borealis project?
Yeah, sure. Borealis is a pretty well-known district in Nevada. It's in far western Nevada, in what we call the Walker Lane. So it's in kind of a north-northwest trending structural zone that kind of follows that diagonal line on the west boundary of Nevada and California. And this Walker Lane area has seen a pretty long history of faulting and tectonism. Like you see a lot of faults and activation on these faults over and over again. And it's also seen a long history of magmatism as well. So those structures have let magmas come up, especially over the past few tens of millions of years, and form some pretty impressive mineral districts. Comstock isn't far away, for example. So we know this is a good neighborhood. Borealis happens to be in the realm of what we call a high sulfidation system. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it means that the fluids that form this thing are likely related to volcanism, shallow volcanic activity, but they were also acid. Okay, so they had a very low pH, and they had also likely a high sulfur content. And these high sulfidation systems, they tend to form where the fluids coming off of magma come up through the ground and they find the water table, okay, the static water table in the ground, and interact with it. And that groundwater actually cools the fluids, and it also neutralizes them or starts to help dilute them, I guess. And that causes the gold to kind of precipitate. So you end up with a blanket-like deposit in many cases that mimics the old water table. And then you might get high-grade feeders that extend downward, like the conduits that brought the fluids up. You might see high-grade structures too. And you see these at Borealis, okay? You see the blanket-like lower-grade deposit here, and that's been mined off and on for years. I remember being in Borealis pit probably in 1994 or so. If it's oxidized, wonderful stuff. These things leach like a dream. They're usually pretty spongy rocks. Cyanide solutions can easily leach the gold out of the rocks in the heap leach. Once you get down in the sulfide regime, the fresh rock regime, metallurgy changes quickly. You wouldn't expect super high recoveries in the heap leach out of the sulfide mineralization. So you really have to find something that can be treated in different means at depth. Okay. And, look, I know that they have oxide targets left here, but, people have got to be aware that this story is really going to be about if they go out and explore and they find big volumes of mineralization here, is the sulfide treatable? Maybe with grade, sure. If grade cures all evils, right? So if they found high grade, and they do have some high grade intercepts on the property, this might be a feasible project. Yeah, absolutely. So it's a
What
good
what do you
project. Well,
consider high grade then for something like this if we are talking about the whole mining scenario where you need high grade to carry some of the metallurgy?
well, look, ideally, it would be great to find something like, the old Goldfields deposit in Nevada where you had very high grade, like half an ounce, even higher than an ounce or multi-ounce stuff. Odds of that, finding that, pretty skinny, but they do have some intercepts in the property that are interesting, like 67 meters, 16 grams. That's interesting. And that is a fair ways down. It's 165 meters down. So that would cut it. Okay. If it has to be like a bulk tonnage thing, you probably need, on the order of certainly at least 2 grams, probably like 3 grams plus to make sulfide, high sulfidation mineralization work. Okay. But, Borealis has that kind of potential. And I don't want to dismiss it. Like, there's been a lot of deposits that have been explored through time. And look, in any deposit, any exploration, focusing on a grade is the key. You want to find the highest grades. I think, given this, if I had the property to explore right now, I would focus like a laser on finding grade, whether it's structures that extend to depth or, like mantos that are blind mantos, like blanket-like things that are still preserved in place. If you can find high grade, even if it's sulfide, mantos or structures here, you can make this work.
Okay. So something to watch for. Very interesting. So I guess when we see drill results, take note of if it's sulfide, if it's oxide, and maybe we'll look forward to some sort of metallurgy. One other thing to note is that the company is currently pouring gold. It's pouring from some minor production that recommenced just a few years ago. The leach pad, that is, that's still producing gold. Look, I had some questions come in on the back of that first interview saying, well, does this mean they're cash flow positive? What sort of revenue do they have? Quinton, do you find this maybe more of a distraction for investors? Because in your eyes, this does sound like more of an exploration story than anything.
Look, my recollection is there is some oxide left on the property, and I'm sure that their mining team can figure that out, like, how to exploit that.
Apparently,
But
there's some stockpiles, yeah, of high grade oxide.
yeah, exactly. So look, there is something to be gained there. I mean, it's always good to have cash flow, but if the story is really about exploration, then that oxide is only going to have kind of a finite limit to it, right? It's not going to go on forever. So, going forward, they're going to have an exploration focus, and that seems to be, to me, reading their materials, what they intend to do, right? So, and what do they need to find? Well, they need to find high grade, will make this thing work. So, distraction, yeah, is it an easy opportunity? Yeah.
Hey, it's just interesting to see a company generating some cash from pouring gold so early on after listing, but yes, still a lot of exploration and more of an exploration story there. Let's move on to the final stocks here. Madre Gold traded SM on the TSX Venture Exchange and SMDRF on the OTCQX. The company's project, the La Guitarra project in Mexico, they're ramping up production. Right now, around 350 tons per day, goaling to be at 500 tons per day by the end of the year. That's when they will announce commercial production. Quinton, what are your thoughts on this asset and this company, please?
Yeah, look, Guitarra, this is an asset. I've looked at it before. Like, this is a pretty well-known mining district in Mexico. I think it's Ciudad or somewhere, if I remember right. So it's not far from Ciudad to Mexico. It is of classic Mexican vein district. Okay, so you're looking at silver veins with a bit of gold, half gram type gold. And it's underexplored. Okay, so it's a classic case. It's almost like what we just talked about for Kootenay, Columba, similar, very, very similar nature. But these guys are focused mainly on development. Okay, so a very big shift, from Kootenay. These guys are focused on development, and I think, given the advanced nature of this project and the fact it's been studied pretty thoroughly, I think they can pull it off. Okay, they've got a very strong team. They've got, a very good understanding of the mine and economics. They've got production going down, but I think the key from here is to see if they can ramp it up. All right. It's a pretty simplistic mill. It's a flotation mill. And if they can ramp this up to 500 tons per day, they should be in a very good position in this silver market. This is an option on silver in many ways, and it's a soon to be, full scale production story.
Do you know anything about the 8 former mine sites on site? It's one thing that they're saying, look, there's a lot of exploration to be done here to use almost a hub and spoke model with their processing facility to bring on these other assets that are already on this project.
Yeah, look, all of these veins are probably part of the same system. So it goes back to what I was saying about Colombia. You've got a hydrothermal system here that was basically generating all of these veins in unison. So I would say that all of these should be compatible for the mill. The hub and spoke, thesis should play out quite well. That said, when you have multiple mines and multiple underground operations you got to support, then it does become a bit of a logistical game at that point. You have development going at any given time. You got to have stopes accessible and, kind of dovetail one with another so that you keep that ore going to the mill. I think that's the game the company's going to have to play to get to 500 tons a day, is really put together a mine plan. I'll say a property-wide mine plan that allows them to do so. Okay. Prior to this, these were mainly mom and pop scale mines, right? They've got to take this collection of mines and now kind of pull it all together and make it into a bigger plant or bigger scale operation. So yeah, the synergies are obviously, apparent here. The mill is key. There's probably other properties in this region. This is right in the middle of a pretty extensive region with similar deposits. If you have an operating mill, hey man, people flock. You build it, they come, kind of thing. So I think if the company can really pull together production, smooth, steady state production out of all these small mines, this should be a very good story. Once again, silver market is going to do well.
Yeah.
This is going to be one of those stories where there's a lot of leverage to an upticking silver.
Oh, absolutely. A play on the silver market, but also growth-oriented producer here. Again, working to commercial production. And all we can say is that right now they're only mining from that La Guitarra mine, but there's a lot of exploration that the company thinks that they're going to start up kind of early to mid next year. Again, we interviewed them last week on the website and podcast as well. Quinton, it's great chatting with you. Thank you so much for getting back on our Stock Talk episodes. Everyone, keep on sending me the companies you want us to discuss. And Quinton and I will be coming back at you with another Stock Talk episode in a couple weeks. So Quinton, again, great chatting with you. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Corey.